When Catherine Mitchell spent her last dollars to bring a mail-order husband from Boston to her failing Montana ranch in 1897, the scholarly, frail-looking man who stepped off the train crushed her last hope of salvation. Benjamin Hayes, with his patched clothes, soft hands, and single shabby suitcase, was nothing like the robust farmer she had envisioned saving her family's legacy from the ruthless cattle baron, circling her property and the bank's looming foreclosure. As Catherine prepared to send this disappointingly poor, seemingly useless Easterner back on the next morning's train, she couldn't possibly suspect that hidden beneath his threadbare exterior, Benjamin Hayes harbored an explosive secret. One that would not only rescue her desperate situation, but ignite a power struggle that would transform the entire valley and everyone in it forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine Mitchell had never considered herself a gambling woman, but desperation had a way of changing people. As she guided her wagon along the rutted road leading from Riverbrook Station to her family's ranch, she cast sideways glances at the stranger sitting beside her, the man who was supposed to become her husband before the week was out. Benjamin Hayes sat stiffly on the wagon seat, his thin hands clutching his single suitcase, his sharp eyes taking in the vast Montana landscape with an expression Catherine couldn't quite decipher. Was it fear, disappointment, calculation? Whatever it was, it did nothing to ease the knot of regret forming in her stomach. "The ranch is about 3 miles ahead," Catherine said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Mitchell land has been in my family for nearly 30 years. My father was one of the first settlers in this valley." Benjamin nodded. "Your letters mentioned that. 200 acres, if I recall." 240, she corrected, though Carson Blackwood would have you believe it's all his by right. "His cattle have been accidentally grazing on my south pasture for months now." "The neighboring rancher you mentioned?" Benjamin asked, showing he had at least paid attention to their correspondence. "Neighboring is too friendly a word. Blackwood owns half the valley already and wants the rest. He's been buying up every struggling homestead since the drought 3 years back." Catherine flicked the reins, urging the horses faster as a chill wind swept down from the mountains. "My father built something that matters here. I won't be the Mitchell who loses it." As they crested a small rise, the Mitchell Ranch came into view, a modest but solid 2-story farmhouse, a large barn with a partially collapsed roof, several outbuildings in various states of repair, and acres of snow-covered pasture stretching toward distant mountains. To Catherine, it represented everything: legacy, home, purpose, but she could only imagine how it appeared to Benjamin Hayes, this thin Easterner with his city manners and clean fingernails. "It's extensive," he offered diplomatically. Catherine almost laughed. "It's falling apart, Mr. Hayes. No need for polite fictions between us. The south barn needs a new roof before spring, the irrigation ditches have to be cleared before planting, and the north fence line won't keep Blackwood's cattle out much longer." She pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "This is why I needed a husband, or rather, a partner who knows ranching." Benjamin climbed down from the wagon, his movements careful but not exactly graceful. Up close, Catherine realized he was older than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with strands of grey at his temples and fine lines around his eyes that spoke of hardship rather than age. "Your letters mentioned farming experience in Pennsylvania," she continued, not bothering to hide the doubt in her voice. "I have some experience with land, yes," Benjamin replied, his Boston accent softening the words in a way that sounded entirely too gentle for Montana ranch work. Catherine sighed as she led him into the house. Martha Brooks, her housekeeper, and the only remaining help Catherine could afford to pay, had prepared the small guest room and left a pot of stew warming on the stove. At least they wouldn't have to face this awkward evening on empty stomachs. "You'll stay here tonight," Catherine said, gesturing to the guest room off the main parlour. "Tomorrow we can discuss arrangements." Benjamin set his suitcase down, his expression unreadable. "You're reconsidering our agreement?" It wasn't a question. Catherine appreciated that he didn't waste time pretending. "Mr. Hayes, I needed someone who could help save this ranch, someone who knows cattle, crops, and the kind of hard work that keeps a place like this alive." She gestured vaguely toward him. "You're not that person." "You mean I'm not what you expected?" he countered calmly. "Not big enough, strong enough, or rough enough to be useful." Catherine felt a flush of embarrassment, but pushed through it. "This isn't about appearances, it's about survival. The bank has extended my loan twice already. I have until spring, planting to show significant improvement or they'll foreclose. And Carson Blackwood will be waiting with cash in hand." Benjamin moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered ranch as dusk began to settle over the valley. "Your letters didn't mention the situation was quite this dire. Would you have come if they had?" Catherine challenged. A faint smile touched his lips. "Probably. I have my own reasons for leaving Boston, which are not relevant to our current discussion." He turned back to her. "You've decided I'm not suitable as a husband or partner. What do you propose instead?" Catherine had rehearsed this part during the long, silent wagon ride. "I'll provide you lodging tonight and purchase your return ticket to Boston tomorrow. We'll call the arrangement dissolved by mutual agreement." Benjamin's expression remained frustratingly neutral. "And you'll face the bank and Blackwood alone." "I've managed alone since my father died 3 years ago, not well enough to save. The ranch, by your own admission." The blunt assessment stung, partly because it contained too much truth. Catherine turned away, busying herself with ladling stew into bowls. "We'll discuss it further in the morning. You must be tired from your journey." They ate dinner in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Martha's occasional attempts at conversation. The older woman had been with the Mitchell family since Catherine was a child and maintained a determined optimism that Catherine both appreciated and found exhausting. "Mr. Hayes, what did you do in Boston before deciding to come west?" Martha asked as she served apple pie that Catherine knew had depleted their precious sugar stores. Benjamin set down his fork. "I worked for a mining company. Administrative duties, mostly." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "A clerk?" "Something like that." He took a sip of water. "Before that, I studied geology at Harvard." This new information caught Catherine's attention. "You're college-educated?" "I am." His tone suggested this wasn't something he considered particularly noteworthy. "Yet you answered an advertisement for a mail-order husband to a struggling Montana." "A ranch," Catherine pressed. "That seems an unusual career path for a Harvard man." Benjamin met her gaze directly for the first time since arriving. "We all have our reasons for seeking new beginnings, Miss Mitchell. I respected your privacy by not questioning the unusual circumstance of a woman advertising for a husband specifically to help save her ranch. Perhaps you might extend me the same courtesy." The gentle rebuke silenced Catherine, and the remainder of the evening passed with minimal conversation. After Martha retired to her small room off the kitchen, Catherine found herself alone with Benjamin in the parlour, the crackling fire doing little to warm the atmosphere between them. "I should warn you," she said finally. "The morning stage leaves at 8. We'll need to depart by 7 to reach town in time." Benjamin, who had been examining a geological survey map of the territory that hung on the wall, turned to her with that same unreadable expression. "Before you purchase that ticket, Miss Mitchell, I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement." Catherine folded her arms. "I'm listening." "Give me 1 week," he said. 7 days to prove I might be of some value to your operation. Not as a husband, I understand that arrangement is no longer on the table, but as a partner of sorts." What kind of partner? The kind who might have skills you haven't considered. He moved closer to the map, his finger tracing the outline of the mountain range that bordered her property to the north. Your ranch is strategically located. There may be opportunities you haven't explored? Catherine laughed without humor. Mr. Hayes, I've considered every possible way to make this land profitable. Cattle prices have been depressed for years. The soil is too rocky for extensive crop farming. What exactly do you think you can discover in 7 days that I haven't found in 3 years? Benjamin's expression remained maddeningly calm. Perhaps nothing, in which case you've lost a week and gained free labor. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm certainly capable of learning whatever tasks you need accomplished. Catherine studied him, trying to understand his motivations. He didn't strike her as a con man. Those typically arrived with grand promises and charismatic smiles. Benjamin Hayes offered neither, just a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his apparent circumstances. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you want to stay when it's clear I've rejected the marriage arrangement?" For the first time, Benjamin's composed demeanor faltered. Something like vulnerability flickered across his features before disappearing behind his careful mask. "Because I have nowhere else to go," he said simply. "Boston holds nothing for me. Now, and despite your assessment of my worth, Miss Mitchell, I do possess knowledge that could be valuable, just not the kind you were expecting." The raw honesty of his admission caught Catherine off guard. Here was something she understood all too well, the desperate need for a place to belong, a purpose to fulfill. It was what kept her fighting for the ranch long after logic dictated. She should sell to Blackwood and start fresh elsewhere. "1 week," she said finally, "but I expect work in exchange for room and board. The fence on the north pasture needs mending, and Martha could use help chopping enough firewood to last the month." Relief softened Benjamin's features momentarily. "Agreed. And understand this, Mr. Hayes. If at the end of that week I don't see value in this partnership, we part ways permanently. No negotiation. Perfectly clear." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Catherine shook it. His grip was firmer than she expected, his skin rougher than it appeared. Perhaps there was more to Benjamin Hayes than met the eye, or perhaps she was simply desperate enough to grasp at any possibility, no matter how slim. Either way, Catherine Mitchell had just gambled 1 more week of her precious time on a man who, by all appearances, had nothing of value to offer. What she couldn't possibly know as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom that night was that Benjamin Hayes hadn't been entirely forthcoming about his past, or about what had really brought him to Riverbrook, Montana. In his shabby suitcase, beneath carefully folded clothes and a worn Bible, lay something that would change the fate of the Mitchell Ranch forever. But first, he needed to confirm his suspicions about the northern ridge and the unusual rock formations he had glimpsed from the train window as they approached Riverbrook Station. Formations that had seemed hauntingly familiar to someone with his particular expertise. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine Mitchell woke before dawn, her mind already racing. With the day's necessary tasks, the previous night's decision to allow Benjamin Hayes a week's probation now seemed foolish in the harsh light of morning. What had she been thinking? Every day counted when spring was approaching, and the bank's deadline loomed like a storm cloud. On the horizon, she dressed quickly in her work clothes, sturdy trousers beneath a woolen skirt, a practical concession to both the bitter Montana winter and the reality that dresses alone were impractical for ranch work. As she descended the stairs, Catherine was surprised to find the kitchen already warm, coffee brewing on the stove, and Martha nowhere to be seen. Instead, Benjamin Hayes sat at the table, a notebook open before him, making careful notations with a worn pencil. He rose when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I hope you don't mind. Martha showed me where the coffee was kept. I'm an early riser." Catherine poured herself a cup, studying him with renewed skepticism. In daylight, he looked even less like a rancher than he had yesterday. His clothes, though clean and carefully mended, had clearly seen better days, but there was something in his alert gaze that suggested a sharp intelligence. "Martha's usually up by now," Catherine remarked, glancing toward the older woman's room. "She mentioned her arthritis was troubling her this morning. I told her I'd start breakfast." Benjamin gestured toward a pan of biscuits baking in the oven. "The cold aggravates joint pain. There are some interesting treatments using mineral salts that might provide relief." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Are you a doctor as well as a geologist?" A faint smile touched his lips. "No, but I've spent time in mining camps where medical attention was scarce. You learn to manage with what's available." This casual reference to mining camps caught Catherine's attention. His letters had mentioned Pennsylvania farming, not mining. Before she could question him further, Benjamin closed his notebook. "I thought I might ride out to examine your North Ridge today," he said. "You mentioned fence repairs were needed there." "We need to mend the fence along the border with Blackwood's property first," Catherine corrected. "That's the priority." "Of course, though I'd still like to survey the northern section when time permits." There was something in his tone that sparked Catherine's curiosity. Why the interest in the North Ridge? It's mostly rocky terrain, unsuitable for grazing. Benjamin hesitated, as though weighing his words carefully. "I noticed unusual formations. As we approached Riverbrook yesterday, geological anomalies can sometimes indicate valuable resources." Catherine almost laughed. "If you're thinking gold, you're about 30 years too late. The big strikes in Montana Territory happened before I was born." "Not gold," Benjamin replied quietly. "Something potentially more valuable in the long term." Before Catherine could press him further, the back door flew open, bringing a blast of cold air and the unwelcome figure of Sam Wilson, Carson Blackwood's foreman. The big man stomped snow from his boots without waiting for an invitation to enter. "Mitchell," he acknowledged. Catherine with barely concealed contempt before his gaze settled on Benjamin. "This the husband you sent for? Looks like you got shorted on the delivery." Catherine bristled. "State your business, Wilson. The day's starting, and unlike Blackwood, I don't have men to do my work for me." Wilson's weathered face split in an unpleasant smile. "Just being neighborly. Mr. Blackwood wanted me to remind you that his offer still stands. Fair market value for this property before the bank takes it for nothing." "The bank isn't taking anything," Catherine replied sharply. "And you can tell Blackwood my answer hasn't changed. The Mitchell Ranch isn't for sale." "Suit yourself," Wilson shrugged. "Though you might want to check your north pasture. Seems some of your cattle broke through that shabby fence again. They're grazing on Blackwood land." Catherine's stomach tightened. "My cattle haven't broken through any fence. Blackwood's men cut that wire 3 times this winter." "Prove it," Wilson challenged, his hand resting meaningfully on the pistol at his hip. "Meanwhile, Mr. Blackwood is charging $10 a head for feed. You can settle up at the main house, or we'll keep the cattle as payment." Benjamin, who had been silently observing this exchange, suddenly spoke. Perhaps Mr. Blackwood would accept. A written agreement instead. A promissory note against future earnings. Wilson turned, seeming to truly notice Benjamin for the first time. "And who might you be?" "Benjamin Hayes, Miss Mitchell's business partner." "Business partner?" Wilson's laugh was derisive. "Lady rancher with a city man for a partner. Blackwood will find that entertaining. I'm glad to provide amusement along with a solution," Benjamin replied mildly. "A formal agreement would document the disputed grazing fees while establishing a paper trail of these incidents." Something in his calm demeanor seemed to unsettle Wilson more than Catherine's obvious anger. The foreman shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. Blackwood doesn't deal in paper promises. Cash or cattle, those are the options. Catherine felt trapped. She couldn't afford to lose a single head of cattle, but neither could she pay Blackwood's extortionate grazing fees for animals he had likely stolen himself. "I'll ride out and bring them back," she decided. "Today. Suit yourself," Wilson repeated, heading for the door, but they crossed onto Blackwood land. That's a fact. His gaze shifted to Benjamin. "Word of advice, mister. Whatever she's paying you, it ain't worth crossing Carson Blackwood. This valley has a way of dealing with outsiders who don't understand the natural order of things." After Wilson departed, Catherine slammed her coffee cup down so hard that dark liquid splashed onto the table. Blackwood's men drove those cattle onto his property deliberately. It's the third time this winter. Benjamin watched her thoughtfully. "You mentioned he wants your land. Why not sell? You could start fresh somewhere else." The question, reasonable though it was, ignited Catherine's temper. "This isn't just land, Mr. Hayes. This is my family's legacy. My father built this ranch from nothing. My mother died giving birth to me in that very room." She pointed toward the parlor. "Their graves are on that hill behind the barn. I won't sell their dreams to a man like Carson Blackwood." Benjamin nodded, accepting her passion without comment. "Then we should retrieve your cattle before addressing the fence issue." "We," Catherine echoed. "I may not look like a rancher, Miss Mitchell, but I can ride, and 2 sets of eyes will make the search more efficient." Catherine hesitated. Taking Benjamin meant revealing just how dire her situation had become. On the other hand, Wilson was right about one thing: the north pasture. Fence was in poor condition, and the cattle might indeed have wandered through. "Fine, but follow my lead. Blackwood's men are known to be trigger-happy when it suits them." An hour later, they rode out together, Catherine on her sturdy buckskin gelding and Benjamin on an older mare named Sadie. To her surprise, he handled the horse competently, if not with the easy familiarity of someone born to the saddle. The north pasture stretched away from the ranch buildings, rising gradually toward a ridge of rocky hills that marked the boundary between Mitchell land and the vast Blackwood holdings beyond. As they rode, Benjamin surveyed the landscape with an intensity that seemed to go beyond casual observation. "Your father chose this location carefully," he remarked. "The water access alone makes it valuable." Catherine nodded. "Sweetwater Creek runs year-round, even in drought years. That's why Blackwood wants it. His southern pastures often go dry by August." "Water rights alone wouldn't justify his persistence," Benjamin mused. "Not when there are other properties with creek access." "Blackwood doesn't like being refused," Catherine explained. "My father turned down his first offer 15 years ago. Each rejection only made him more determined." They reached the fence line where several posts had been knocked askew and the wire sagged dangerously. Catherine dismounted to examine the damage, her experienced eye easily reading the signs. "Cut," she concluded grimly, holding up the cleanly severed wire. "No cow did this." Benjamin knelt beside her, examining not just the wire, but the surrounding soil. His fingers sifted through the dirt with practiced precision. "Recent boot prints," he confirmed, "and the direction of the cattle tracks suggests they were driven through, not that they broke through seeking grazing land." Catherine glanced at him with newfound respect. "You've tracked before?" "Among other things." He straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. "Your cattle are likely being held somewhere accessible. Blackwood wants payment, not the animals themselves." They remounted and crossed into Blackwood territory, following the clear trail of multiple cattle moving in an orderly line. Too orderly for animals that had wandered freely. Catherine felt her anger building with each passing mile. The audacity of Blackwood's theft was matched only by the arrogance of his demand for grazing fees. They found the missing cattle, 12 head in all, confined in a small box canyon about 2 miles onto Blackwood property. A single ranch hand dozed on horseback at the narrow entrance, clearly not expecting anyone to challenge the arrangement. The young cowboy startled awake as they approached, his hand moving instinctively to his holstered pistol before registering. "Catherine's identity. Miss Mitchell," he acknowledged nervously. "Mr. Wilson said you might come." "Those are my cattle, Jimmy," Catherine said, recognizing one of Blackwood's newer hands, a local boy, barely 18. "Stolen from my north pasture after someone cut my fence." Jimmy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Mr. Wilson said they broke through, said we were holding them safe-like until you paid the grazing fee." "And did you see them break through?" Benjamin asked calmly. The young cowboy's eyes flicked between them. I just follow orders, mister." "Of course you do," Benjamin replied, "but perhaps you might follow this order as well. Tell Mr. Blackwood that Miss Mitchell will be filing a formal complaint with the county sheriff regarding cattle rustling and property damage. Montana territorial law is quite clear on the penalties for such offenses." The confidence with which Benjamin invoked the law seemed to unnerve Jimmy more than any threat could have. The young man hesitated only briefly before wheeling his horse. "Aside, take 'em," he muttered. "Ain't worth trouble with the law." As they guided the recovered cattle back toward Mitchell land, Catherine studied Benjamin with renewed curiosity. The man was full of contradictions. Educated, yet apparently destitute, physically unimpressive, yet somehow commanding when the situation required it. "You speak as though you're familiar with territorial law," she remarked as they approached the damaged fence. "I've had occasion to study various legal frameworks," he replied vaguely. "Knowledge is often the most effective weapon against men like Blackwood." "Knowledge doesn't fix fences or pay bank loans," Catherine countered. Benjamin reined his horse to a stop, his gaze fixed on the ridge that rose beyond the north pasture, the area he had expressed interest in earlier. "Perhaps not directly," he agreed, "but it can reveal opportunities where others see only obstacles." He turned to her with sudden decisiveness. "Miss Mitchell, after we secure these cattle, I'd like your permission to examine that ridge more closely. I believe there might be something there that could change your fortunes entirely. What could possibly be up there, except rocks and scrub pine?" For the first time since his arrival, Benjamin Hayes smiled fully, a transformation that momentarily revealed a glimpse of a younger, less burdened man beneath his reserved exterior. "That, Miss Mitchell, is precisely what I intend to discover." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Mitchell ranch as Catherine and Benjamin returned the recovered cattle to the south pasture. After securing the herd, they had worked side by side, mending the damaged fence, Benjamin proving surprisingly competent with the physical labor despite his scholarly appearance. "You handle tools better than I expected," Catherine remarked as they gathered their equipment. "Harvard doesn't preclude practical skills," Benjamin replied, rolling down his sleeves. His hands, though initially soft-looking, were now marked with fresh calluses and small cuts from the day's work. "My father believed every man should know how to build and repair, regardless of education." "And what did he do, your father?" Shadow crossed Benjamin's face. He owned a small manufacturing concern in Massachusetts, made mining equipment. The careful neutrality with which he offered this information suggested there was more to the story. Catherine didn't press. Everyone who came west carried secrets or regrets, sometimes both. What mattered was the present, and currently Benjamin Hayes had earned at least a modicum of respect through his willingness to work. "You mentioned wanting to examine the North Ridge," she said, changing the subject. "We have a few hours of daylight left." Benjamin's expression brightened immediately. "Yes, I'd appreciate that opportunity." They rode in companionable silence toward the rocky formation that marked the northern boundary of Mitchell property. Unlike the fertile valley where the main ranch building stood, this section rose steadily into rocky terrain unsuitable for grazing or cultivation. Catherine's father had often lamented that nearly a quarter of their acreage was essentially useless, good for nothing but rattlesnakes and scrub pine, he'd complained. As they climbed higher, Benjamin's demeanor changed. The reserved, cautious man who had stepped off the train yesterday was replaced by someone intensely focused, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape, occasionally dismounting to examine rock formations or soil composition. "What exactly are you looking for?" Catherine finally asked as he knelt to inspect a reddish outcropping. Benjamin stood, dusting off his knees. "Indicators." His typically precise speech had become clipped, distracted. "Of what?" Instead of answering directly, he pointed toward a narrow ravine about half a mile ahead. "We need to go there." Catherine frowned but followed as he urged his horse forward with newfound urgency. The ravine cut deeply through the ridge, creating steep walls of exposed rock on either side. As they entered the shadowed passage, the temperature dropped noticeably. Benjamin dismounted, handing his reins to Catherine before approaching the ravine wall. His fingers traced the layered stone with reverent precision, his expression growing increasingly animated. "Incredible," he murmured. "It's exactly as I suspected." Catherine's patience was wearing thin. "Mr. Hayes, I don't have time for geological appreciation. Either explain your interest or let's return to the ranch. There's still work to be done before sunset." Benjamin turned to her, and for the first time since his arrival, Catherine saw something approaching excitement in his normally controlled features. "Miss Mitchell, are you aware of what's happening in Pennsylvania and Ohio right now? The industrial revolution that's transforming the nation?" "I'm a rancher in Montana, not a hermit," Catherine replied dryly. "Yes, I read newspapers. Manufacturing, railroads, steel production, progress marching westward." "And what powers that progress?" Benjamin pressed. "What single resource has become the lifeblood of American industry?" Understanding dawned slowly. "Coal," Catherine said. "You think there's coal here? On my property?" Benjamin nodded, gesturing to the striated rock face. "Not just any coal. These formations suggest anthracite, the highest quality, cleanest burning variety. Extremely valuable for industrial purposes." His finger traced a dark seam visible in the ravine wall. "This outcropping is merely a surface indication. The main deposit likely runs deep beneath your north ridge, possibly extending for miles." Catherine stared at the unremarkable-looking black streak. Could something so simple transform her failing ranch into a valuable property? The possibility seemed too convenient, too much like the false hopes that had sustained other desperate homesteaders before they lost everything. "If there's coal here, why hasn't anyone discovered it before? Geological surveys have mapped this territory for decades." "Government surveys focus on agricultural potential and obvious mineral deposits," Benjamin explained. "Anthracite requires specific expertise to identify, particularly when it's not exposed through extensive erosion." He hesitated before adding, "Your North Ridge has a geological composition remarkably similar to formations I studied extensively in Pennsylvania at Harvard." Catherine's skepticism remained evident. Benjamin's expression closed slightly. "And afterward, during my time with Barrett Mining Corporation," the name struck a chord of recognition. Barrett Mining was one of the largest coal operations in the East, their wealth and influence extending even to national politics. The casual way Benjamin referenced employment with such a powerful company raised more questions than it answered. "You worked for Barrett Mining, yet you answered an advertisement for a mail-order husband to a struggling Montana ranch," Catherine stated flatly. "That progression makes little sense, Mr. Hayes." Benjamin turned back to the rock face, his expression unreadable. "My relationship with Barrett Mining ended poorly." After a moment's hesitation, he continued, I discovered certain practices I couldn't condone. Safety measures ignored to increase profits, water sources contaminated, workers exposed to dangerous conditions without protection. You were fired for raising concerns, Catherine guessed. I was blacklisted, Benjamin corrected quietly. After presenting evidence to the state inspector, Barrett Mining owns judges, newspapers, and politicians across Pennsylvania. They destroyed my reputation, ensured no reputable company would hire me. His laugh held no humor. They were quite thorough. Even my Harvard connections proved useless against their influence. The pieces of Benjamin Hayes began to assemble into a clearer picture. Not a failure or desperate drifter, but a principled man who had sacrificed position and security for his convictions. Catherine found this version of him far more compelling than any rugged farmer she might have imagined as her mail-order husband. So you came west to escape their reach, she concluded. To start again where Barrett has no influence, Benjamin agreed. Your advertisement offered immediate placement far from the eastern coalfields. It seemed providential. Catherine's mind raced with implications. If Benjamin was right about the coal deposit, her worthless North Ridge might contain a fortune. Enough to save the ranch and secure her future independently of cattle prices or Blackwood's machinations. How certain are you about this coal seam? She asked. I'd stake my professional reputation on it, Benjamin replied, then smiled faintly. Though, admittedly, that's not worth much currently. And what would it take to verify your assessment? To be absolutely certain. Core samples, test mining. We'd need equipment I doubt you have on hand. He gestured to the exposed seam. This surface indication is promising, but tells us little about the depth or extent of the deposit. Catherine nodded, her practical nature already calculating costs and logistics. The bank won't extend further credit without substantial collateral. And I don't have cash for mining equipment or expert assessments. Benjamin studied her thoughtfully. There might be another approach, one that doesn't require significant initial investment. I'm listening. Mining interests are speculative by nature. They invest in potential, not certainty. He ran his hand along the coal seam. With my geological background, I could prepare a preliminary assessment. Maps, surface sampling, comparisons to productive anthracite fields back east. Enough to attract interest from smaller mining operations looking to establish Western holdings. You mean sell the mineral rights? Catherine frowned. Lease them, Benjamin corrected. Maintain ownership of the land while granting limited extraction rights for an advance payment plus royalties on production. You generate immediate capital to satisfy the bank while securing ongoing income separate from your ranching operation. The proposal was compelling yet raised immediate concerns. Catherine had seen other ranches decimated by mining operations, landscapes scarred, water fouled, the rhythm of rural life shattered by industrial machinery and transient workers. I won't destroy my father's ranch for coal money, she said. Firmly, modern extraction methods properly managed can minimize environmental impact, Benjamin assured her. Part of my disagreement with Barrett involved their refusal to implement such methods. With carefully drafted lease terms, you could ensure the mining operation remains contained to the North Ridge, well away from your grazing land and water sources. Catherine gazed across her property, seeing it with new eyes, not just as struggling ranch land, but as potentially valuable coal fields. The opportunity was tantalizing, yet something still troubled her. Why are you telling me this? She asked directly. With your expertise, you could have kept this discovery to yourself, bought my land when the bank foreclosed, and claimed the coal rights personally. Benjamin's expression registered surprise, then something like respect. A fair question. The answer is simple. I may have lost my position and reputation, but not my principles. Deception for personal gain is precisely what I fought against at Barrett. He met her gaze steadily. Besides, I'm not in a financial position to acquire property even at foreclosure prices. Catherine studied him, weighing his words against her instinctive wariness. She had learned the hard way that men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. "And what do you want from this arrangement, Mr. Hayes, if I pursue this coal discovery?" "A partnership," he replied, without hesitation. "I provide the geological expertise and industry connections that remain available to me. You provide the land and local standing. We divide any proceeds equally after your ranch debts are settled." Equal partners. Catherine tested the concept. "Despite the fact that I bring the land and you bring only knowledge. Knowledge that transforms worthless rock into valuable resources," Benjamin countered calmly. "But I'm open to negotiation on the specific terms." Catherine considered the unexpected turn her situation had taken. Yesterday, she had been prepared to send this seemingly useless mail-order husband back east on the morning train. Now she was contemplating a business partnership that might save her ranch in ways she had never imagined. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "This changes everything." Benjamin nodded, his gaze returning to the coal seam with undisguised interest. "Of course, though I should note that time may not be our ally. If I recognize these geological indicators, others eventually will too. Others, like Blackwood." The possibility sent a chill through Catherine. "I noticed his foreman paying particular attention to your North Ridge when he visited this morning," Benjamin confirmed. "His interest seemed more than casual." The implications were clear. If Blackwood suspected valuable resources on Mitchell land, his campaign to acquire her property would only intensify, and his methods might grow more aggressive than cut fences and stolen cattle. As they rode back toward the ranch house, the setting sun painted the mountains in golden light. Catherine Mitchell found herself at a crossroads she hadn't anticipated. The man she had rejected for being too poor, too weak, too unprepared for ranch life, had revealed himself as potentially her greatest asset, if his assessment of the coal deposits proved accurate and if his integrity matched his claims. Benjamin Hayes represented both opportunity and risk. Trusting him meant gambling what little security she had left on the word of a man she barely knew. Yet something in his direct gaze and principled stance resonated with her own stubborn determination to chart her own course against overwhelming odds. By the time they reached the ranch yard, Catherine had made her decision. Whatever secret Benjamin Hayes had brought to her failing ranch, she would see it through, for better or worse. The following morning, Catherine woke to the unfamiliar sound of voices in her study. Pulling on a robe, she descended the stairs to find Benjamin seated at her father's desk, deep in conversation with Martha. Spread before them were yellowed maps and documents Catherine hadn't seen in years. "I hope we didn't wake you," Benjamin said, rising as she entered. "Martha mentioned your father kept detailed records of the property, including the original geological surveys. He was meticulous about documentation," Catherine acknowledged, moving closer to examine what they'd unearthed. "Though I don't recall him mentioning anything about coal deposits." The original territorial survey from 1868 wouldn't have been looking specifically for anthracite indicators, Benjamin explained, pointing to notations on one of the maps. "But there are references here to carboniferous formations on the North Ridge. To most surveyors, that simply indicated unsuitable farming soil. To someone with specialized knowledge, it suggests potential coal seams." Martha placed a cup of coffee in Catherine's hands. "Your father always said that North Ridge would be good for something someday," she remarked. "Seems he might have been right, just not in the way he expected." Catherine studied the maps with new interest. Her father had indeed complained about the worthless ridgeland, but he'd adamantly refused multiple offers from neighboring ranchers to sell off that section separately. She'd always assumed it was stubbornness. Mitchell Land remained Mitchell Land. Now she wondered if he'd suspected something more. "What's our next step?" she asked Benjamin. "We need to verify the extent of the deposit and its quality," he replied. "That requires proper core samples from multiple locations across the ridge. Without specialized equipment, we'll have to improvise." "The blacksmith in town might be able to forge what we need," Catherine suggested. "Tom Bailey owes me a favor for breaking that new stallion of his last spring." Benjamin nodded. "Perfect. We'll also need to reach out to potential investors discreetly. If Blackwood gets wind of our activities before we have legal protections in place, he could move against us more aggressively." "I don't have many connections outside Riverbrook," Catherine admitted. "Most mining companies would dismiss a woman rancher without a second thought. Fortunately, I still maintain correspondence with several ethical operators who defied Barrett's blacklisting," Benjamin replied. "Men who might consider a new venture in Montana territory, particularly when presented with promising preliminary findings." "And the bank? They're expecting a payment I can't make in 3 weeks." Benjamin considered this. "We need to buy time. Perhaps your banker might be persuaded to grant an extension based on potential mineral development?" Catherine laughed without humor. "Frank Spencer is practically in Blackwood's pocket. He's been calling my loan specifically because Blackwood wants him to." "Then we'll need to appeal to his self-interest," Benjamin concluded. "Every banker wants to back a successful venture. If we present compelling evidence of coal deposits, his allegiance might shift accordingly." Their planning session was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Catherine moved to the window, surprised to see Sheriff Mike Donnelly riding toward the house, accompanied by a younger man she didn't recognize. "The sheriff," she informed Benjamin, hastily gathering the maps. "He's Blackwood's cousin by marriage, but generally fair-minded. Still, better not to reveal our plans prematurely." Sheriff Donnelly removed his hat as he entered, nodding respectfully. To Catherine, "Miss Mitchell, hope I'm not intruding on your morning." "Not at all, Sheriff. What brings you out to Mitchell Land?" Donnelly's gaze shifted to Benjamin. "Heard you had a visitor. Wanted to make introductions, being as I'm responsible for keeping peace in the county." He extended his hand. "Mike Donnelly, County Sheriff." Benjamin shook the offered hand. "Benjamin Hayes, I arrived from Boston 2 days ago. As Miss Mitchell's—" The sheriff left the question hanging. Catherine interjected before Benjamin could respond. "Mr. Hayes is my business partner. We're exploring diversification options for the ranch." Donnelly nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, Mr. Hayes, welcome to Montana Territory. This here is Deputy Marshal from the Land Office in Helena." He gestured to the younger man who had remained silent. "He's conducting routine verification of property boundaries. There's been some disagreement between neighboring ranchers lately." Marshal stepped forward, his manner officiously formal. "We're surveying all properties in this valley, ensuring the territorial records match current occupancy. Standard procedure." Catherine's suspicion immediately flared. There had never been a standard procedure for boundary verification in the 15 years she'd lived on the ranch. This sudden interest coincided too conveniently with her discovery of potentially valuable resources. "Our boundaries are clearly marked and match the original land grant," she stated firmly. "My father's documentation is complete and filed with the territorial office." "I'm sure everything is in order," Marshall replied smoothly. "This is merely verification, particularly regarding your northern boundary, which appears to follow natural features rather than survey lines in some sections." Benjamin's expression remained neutral, but Catherine noticed his posture stiffen slightly. "The North Ridge boundaries were established by territorial survey in 1868, he remarked. "Natural features often serve as legal demarcation points, particularly in less agriculturally viable terrain." Marshall's eyes narrowed at Benjamin's informed response. You seem knowledgeable about territorial land law, Mr. Hayes. I've studied various legal frameworks during my career, Benjamin replied vaguely. Sheriff Donnelly cleared his throat. At any rate, Miss Mitchell, we'll need to conduct a riding survey of your property lines. Standard procedure requires the landowner's accompaniment. The timing couldn't be worse. Catherine had planned to visit Tom Bailey today about forging the equipment Benjamin needed. Every delay worked in Blackwood's favor as the bank's deadline approached. I'd be happy to accompany Deputy Marshal, Benjamin offered unexpectedly. As Miss Mitchell's business partner, I should familiarize myself with all aspects of the property. Catherine shot him a questioning look, which he answered with a barely perceptible nod. The sheriff seemed taken aback by the suggestion, but found no reasonable grounds to object. That would be acceptable, Marshall conceded reluctantly. We'll start with the northern boundary. After the men departed, Martha approached Catherine with unconcealed concern. That was no routine survey. Blackwood's got wind of something. I think you're right, Catherine agreed grimly. The question is, how much does he know, and what is he planning? Mr. Hayes seemed to understand the danger, Martha observed. Quick thinking, offering to go with them. Catherine nodded, though worry gnawed at her. Benjamin was clever, but he was facing men who had spent decades navigating the complex power dynamics of frontier politics. If Blackwood suspected valuable resources on Mitchell land, he would stop at nothing to claim them. I need to ride into town, she decided. We can't afford to waste any time. Tom Bailey's blacksmith shop occupied a prominent corner in Riverbrook's modest business district. The burly smith was hammering a glowing horseshoe when Catherine entered, his powerful arms glistening with sweat despite the winter chill. Miss Mitchell, he greeted her, plunging the shaped metal into water with a satisfying hiss. Didn't expect to see you in town today. Something need fixing at the ranch. Catherine waited until Bailey's young apprentice left to deliver a completed order before approaching the forge. I need something made, Tom. Something unusual, and I need your discretion. Bailey's bushy eyebrows rose. Sounds serious. It could be the difference between keeping my ranch and losing everything, Catherine admitted. The blacksmith nodded soberly. Your father was good to me when I set up shop here. What do you need? Catherine produced the rough diagram Benjamin had sketched that morning. A drilling apparatus capable of extracting core samples from rock formations. Mr. Hayes provided specifications based on equipment he's worked with previously. Bailey studied the drawing with professional interest. Mining equipment on Mitchell land. His voice held surprise rather than judgment. We have reason to believe there might be valuable deposits on the North Ridge, Catherine explained, lowering her voice though no one else was present. But we need to verify before approaching investors or the bank, and Blackwood doesn't know. We suspect he's getting suspicious. The land office sent a deputy to verify boundaries this morning, focusing specifically on the North Ridge. Bailey whistled softly. Carson Blackwood doesn't miss much that happens in this valley. If there's something valuable on your land, he'll want it. He studied the diagram again. I can make this. Might take a few days to get all the components right. We don't have a few days, Tom. The blacksmith considered this challenge. I've got some parts from that broken well drill the Petersons abandoned last year. Might be able to adapt them. He nodded decisively. Come back tomorrow afternoon. I'll have something workable by then. I need one more favor, Catherine added. If anyone asks what you're making, farm equipment repairs, Bailey finished for her. Nobody's business what happens between a smith and his customers. Relieved, Catherine thanked him and headed toward her next destination, the Riverbrook Bank. The modest brick building represented both stability and threat. Inside, Frank Spencer's office reflected the bank manager's aspirations toward Eastern sophistication, with leather-bound books and a large mahogany desk that seemed out of place in the frontier town. "Miss Mitchell," Spencer greeted her with professional courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't expecting you until our scheduled meeting next week. I assume you've come regarding the pending payment?" "Actually, Mr. Spencer, I've come to discuss a development that might affect the bank's position on my loan extension." Catherine chose her words carefully, revealing enough to pique interest without exposing their full discovery. "We've identified potential mineral resources on Mitchell property that could significantly increase its value and future revenue potential." Spencer's expression shifted from polite dismissal to cautious interest. "Mineral resources? What kind precisely?" "We're conducting preliminary assessments to verify type and quantity," Catherine replied, deliberately vague. "My business partner, Mr. Benjamin Hayes, has extensive experience in geological evaluation from his work with Eastern mining operations." "I wasn't aware you had taken on a business partner, Miss Mitchell." "A recent arrangement. Mr. Hayes brings specialized knowledge that complements my understanding of the property." Spencer leaned back in his chair, studying her with calculated assessment. "Carson Blackwood mentioned you had a visitor from back east. He didn't mention mining experience." The casual reference confirmed Catherine's suspicions. Blackwood was monitoring her activities closely, and Spencer was indeed relaying information. She would need to proceed with extreme caution. "Mr. Hayes and I are still exploring options," she said carefully. "Given the potential value these resources represent, I'm requesting a 30-day extension on my next payment to allow proper assessment." Spencer tapped his fingers on the desk, clearly weighing factors beyond simple banking considerations. "The bank's position remains unchanged, Miss Mitchell. Your payment is due as scheduled. However," he added as Catherine began to protest, "I might consider a 2-week extension if you provide documentation of these alleged mineral findings. Something substantial from a qualified expert." It wasn't the outcome Catherine had hoped for, but it would give them precious additional days to gather evidence and approach potential investors. As she left the bank, Catherine felt the weight of growing complications. Blackwood was clearly suspicious, the bank remained an imminent threat, and Benjamin was currently riding their property boundaries with men whose loyalties lay elsewhere. Yet beneath these concerns ran a current of cautious hope. For the first time since her father's death, Catherine Mitchell had something beyond sheer determination to sustain her fight for the ranch. She had a potential path to true security and independence. The mail-order husband she had nearly rejected, for being too poor, had indeed brought something of immeasurable value, possibility. Dusk had settled over the Mitchell ranch by the time Benjamin returned from the boundary survey. Catherine watched anxiously from the porch as he dismounted, his movements betraying exhaustion after hours in the saddle. The tight set of his jaw suggested the day had not gone well. "They're gone?" she asked as he climbed the porch steps. "For now." Benjamin accepted the cup of coffee Martha brought out. "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. This is most welcome." Once Martha had returned inside, Catherine pressed for details. "What happened out there?" "Deputy Marshal was particularly interested in the ravine where we found the coal seam," Benjamin reported, his voice low despite their privacy. "He took extensive notes about geological formations that shouldn't concern a land office representative. When I questioned his interest, he claimed, they're updating natural resource documentation for all territorial properties." "You don't believe him?" Not for a moment. Benjamin sipped his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Marshall knows enough geology to recognize potential coal indicators. Someone has briefed him, likely Blackwood." Catherine's hands clenched unconsciously. "Did they challenge our boundary markers?" "They found no grounds to dispute your claim to the North Ridge," Benjamin assured her. "Your father's documentation is impeccable, but they're clearly building a case for something." He hesitated. Marshall asked several pointed questions about mining rights versus surface ownership under territorial law. The implication was clear and alarming. They're looking for legal loopholes to claim the coal without buying my land, Benjamin nodded grimly. In some territories, mineral rights can be separated from surface ownership through various legal mechanisms. It's complicated law, but with enough political influence, Blackwood could petition for mining access while I retain only the surface. Rights, Catherine finished, understanding the threat, which would effectively destroy the ranch while cheating me out of the coal's value. Precisely. We need to move quickly. Benjamin pulled a small notebook from his pocket, opening it to reveal meticulous sketches and notations. I've mapped what I believe are the most promising locations for test drilling based on today's observations. If Bailey can provide the equipment tomorrow, we should begin sampling immediately. Catherine updated him on her conversation with the blacksmith and the bank manager's reluctant offer of a 2-week extension predicated on documented mineral evidence. 2 weeks is barely enough time, Benjamin mused, but it might suffice for preliminary assessment. Did Spencer seem to be acting on Blackwood's behalf? Without question. He mentioned that Blackwood had informed him of your arrival. Catherine shook her head in frustration. Nothing happens in this valley without Carson Blackwood knowing about it. He has eyes everywhere. Then we'll need to be exceptionally careful with our test drilling, Benjamin concluded. Ideally, we should work at night when observation from a distance would be difficult. The following afternoon, Catherine returned from town with several large bundles wrapped in canvas and secured to her wagon. Tom Bailey had exceeded expectations, repurposing parts from abandoned equipment to create a functional, if rudimentary, core sampling apparatus. The blacksmith had added several specialized drill bits of his own design, along with a stern warning. Blackwood's foreman was asking questions this morning, Catherine reported, as Benjamin examined the equipment with obvious approval. Wanted to know if I'd ordered any unusual repairs lately. Bailey fed him a story about broken plow parts, but Wilson didn't seem entirely convinced. This is excellent craftsmanship, Benjamin remarked, testing the drill's mechanism. Bailey is wasted in a small town like Riverbrook. His wife's family homesteaded here. He followed her from Chicago after the war. Catherine helped unload the remaining equipment. What's our plan for tonight? Benjamin spread his hand-drawn map on a crate. I've identified 3 primary locations where we should take samples. The first is here, near where we observed the surface seam. The others are positioned to help determine the extent and direction of the deposit. He traced a line across the north ridge. If we're fortunate, the anthracite bed runs continuously through this formation. They worked throughout the afternoon preparing for the night's expedition, gathering tools, lanterns, and sample containers. Martha packed food, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. You should know, she told Catherine privately. Jimmy Miller rode by earlier, Blackwood's young ranch hand. Said he was looking for strays, but he circled mighty close to the house. Spying, Catherine concluded. Almost certainly, Martha agreed. Be careful tonight. That north ridge is treacherous enough in daylight. Under cover of darkness, Catherine and Benjamin set out for the first drilling site, leading pack horses loaded with Bailey's equipment. A quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate without lanterns, which might have drawn unwanted attention. The night air carried a biting chill, a reminder that winter had not yet released its grip on Montana territory. Your father chose challenging land, Benjamin observed, as they picked their way across increasingly rocky terrain. Most would have opted for more accessible acreage. He always said the best opportunities aren't found on easy paths, Catherine replied, a memory surfacing unexpectedly. When I was 12, he took me to this ridge and told me someday it would prove more valuable than all our grazing land combined. I thought he was just trying to make me feel better about falling off my horse. Benjamin glanced at her with interest. He never mentioned why he believed that. Not specifically, but he was friends with an old prospector who used to winter in our barn. They would spend evenings poring over maps and rock samples. Catherine guided her horse around a boulder. After the prospector died, my father became even more adamant about keeping the North Ridge, despite multiple offers to purchase just that section. Your father might have suspected the coal deposits without having the expertise to confirm them, Benjamin suggested. The old prospector could have recognized the indicators. They reached the first sampling site near midnight, the ravine where they had observed the surface coal seam. Working by lantern light, they assembled Bailey's drilling apparatus. The device was ingenious in its simplicity, a hand-cranked boring mechanism with interchangeable bits designed to cut cleanly through rock, extracting cylindrical samples that would reveal the layers beneath the surface. "I'll operate the drill," Benjamin instructed. "You manage the sample collection and cataloging." The work proved arduously slow and physically demanding. Benjamin threw his full weight into turning the crank as the drill bit ground into the rocky earth, producing a steady stream of dust and occasional sparks. Despite his scholarly appearance, he displayed surprising endurance, continuing long after Catherine expected him to request a break. After nearly an hour of continuous drilling, the bit suddenly plunged deeper, suggesting they had broken through a harder layer into something more yielding. Benjamin carefully extracted the drill, revealing a core sample nearly 2 feet long. "Shine the lantern here," he requested, his voice tense with anticipation. In the golden light, the cylindrical sample revealed distinct layers: sandstone, shale, and then, unmistakably, a thick band of glossy black coal. Benjamin examined it with reverent precision, breaking off a small piece and striking it against metal. It sparked brilliantly, confirming its high carbon content. "Anthracite," he confirmed, his professional demeanor momentarily giving way to undisguised excitement. "And high quality at that. Look at the luster, the conchoidal fracture pattern." His finger traced the coal band in the sample. "This seam is at least 14 inches thick, possibly more." "Is that significant?" Catherine asked, struggling to interpret the discovery's importance. "Extraordinarily so. Eastern mines operate profitably on seams half this thickness." Benjamin carefully wrapped the sample in cloth. "If this is representative of the deposit throughout the ridge, you're sitting on a fortune, Miss Mitchell." They proceeded to the second location, drilling until nearly dawn and extracting core samples that confirmed the coal seam extended at least a half-mile from the initial discovery. Exhausted but triumphant, they returned to the ranch as first light crested the eastern mountains. "We'll need to analyze these properly," Benjamin said, as they secured the precious samples in Catherine's study. "Measure density, carbon content, volatile components. I can perform basic assessments, but eventually we'll need professional assay results to approach serious investors." "Or to convince Spencer at the bank," Catherine added, practical despite her exhaustion. "These samples will certainly support our request for an extension," Benjamin agreed, "but we should be cautious about revealing too much to Spencer directly. Given his relationship with Blackwood, any information we provide could be compromised." Catherine nodded, rubbing her stiff shoulders. "So what's our next step?" "I need to prepare a preliminary geological assessment based on these samples and our observations." Benjamin removed a small leather case from his suitcase, revealing drafting tools and high-quality paper. "With your permission, I'll use these findings to contact several mining operators I trust, men who have the capital and integrity to develop these resources responsibly. And if Blackwood moves against us before we secure investors?" Benjamin's expression grew solemn. "That's a very real possibility. Successfully filing mineral claims requires navigating territorial bureaucracy, a process typically taking weeks. Blackwood clearly has influence with local officials, which could work against us. Then we need leverage," Catherine concluded, her mind racing despite fatigue. Something to hold Blackwood at bay while we secure our position. What did you have in mind? Catherine considered the various factors at play, Blackwood's power, the bank's deadline, and the precious samples now hidden in her father's desk. An idea began to form. Risky, but potentially effective. The territorial governor is visiting Helena next week for a railroad commission meeting, she said slowly. Governor Davis is known for supporting independent operators over large consolidations. He's also famously opposed to the influence of men like Blackwood in territorial politics. Benjamin followed her reasoning immediately. If we could secure an audience, present our preliminary findings and concerns about Blackwood's methods, the governor might ensure our claim receives fair consideration, Catherine finished. It's a 4-day ride to Helena, but it might be our best chance. The strategy was bold, perhaps excessively so, but the alternatives seemed increasingly limited. As they discussed logistics, Martha entered with breakfast and an expression that immediately raised alarm. "Carson Blackwood just rode onto our property," she announced tensely, "with Wilson and 3 other men." Catherine moved to the window. 5 riders approached the house at a deliberate pace, Carson Blackwood in the lead. Unlike his foreman's previous visit, this appeared to be an official call. Blackwood was dressed in his finest, suggesting a man who believed he held the upper hand. "Hide the samples and your notes," Catherine instructed Benjamin quickly. "Martha, put the drilling equipment in the root cellar." As Benjamin gathered their evidence, Catherine straightened her clothing and attempted to smooth her hair, disheveled from the night's work. There was no hiding her exhaustion, but she could at least present a composed front to her unwelcome visitor. Carson Blackwood dismounted with the ease of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. In his 50s, he maintained the powerful build of his younger years, his silver-streaked hair and trimmed beard, giving him a distinguished appearance that belied his ruthless nature. He removed his hat as Catherine opened the door, offering a smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Miss Mitchell," he greeted her with exaggerated courtesy. "I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient hour." "What brings you to Mitchell Land, Mr. Blackwood?" Catherine asked directly, foregoing pleasantries. "Neighborly concern," he replied smoothly. "I understand you've taken on a business partner recently. In these difficult times, it seemed prudent to introduce myself." His gaze shifted past her, settling on Benjamin, who had appeared in the hallway. "You must be Mr. Hayes, the geologist, from Boston." The specific reference to Benjamin's profession, information they had shared with no one in Riverbrook, confirmed Catherine's worst fears. Blackwood wasn't merely suspicious. He was well informed about Benjamin's background and likely their activities as well. The game had changed dramatically. As Blackwood stood confidently on her porch, Catherine realized they were no longer racing just against the bank's deadline. They were now engaged in a direct confrontation with the most powerful man in the valley, a man renowned for destroying anyone who stood in his way. "Mr. Blackwood," Benjamin acknowledged, with a composure that impressed Catherine given their precarious situation. "I wasn't aware my background was common knowledge in Riverbrook." Blackwood's smile widened fractionally. "Montana Territory may be remote, Mr. Hayes, but we're not entirely disconnected from civilization. Telegraph lines reach even frontier towns these days." He turned back to Catherine. "May I come in? I believe we have matters of mutual interest to discuss." Catherine hesitated, weighing the risks of allowing this intrusion against the potential benefits of learning exactly what Blackwood knew. Finally, she stepped aside, silently inviting him to enter while signaling his men to remain outside. The rancher moved into the parlor with the confident ease of someone accustomed to dominating any space he occupied. He took in the room with a calculating gaze, noticing the coffee cups and papers hastily gathered from the desk. "You've had a busy night, I see," he remarked, choosing the most comfortable chair without invitation. Ranch work doesn't confine itself to daylight hours, Mr. Blackwood, Catherine replied, remaining standing while Benjamin positioned himself near the doorway, neither fleeing nor fully committing to the confrontation. Indeed. Blackwood nodded agreeably. Though most ranchers concern themselves with cattle and crops, not geological surveys. The direct reference to their activities confirmed Catherine's worst fears. Blackwood had been watching them closely, likely with Jimmy Miller or another spy reporting their movements. My father always encouraged diversifying our interests, Catherine responded cautiously. Mr. Hayes has been kind enough to offer his expertise in assessing all of Mitchell Ranch's potential. Admirable initiative, Blackwood said, his tone suggesting anything but admiration. Though curious timing, given your financial difficulties with the bank. One might wonder why a former Barrett mining geologist would suddenly appear at a struggling ranch just as certain the resources come to light. Benjamin stepped forward, his scholarly demeanor hardening into something more formidable. Your information network is impressive, Mr. Blackwood, but perhaps incomplete. I severed ties with Barrett Mining over a year ago. Yes, under rather unfortunate circumstances, I understand. Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. Something about regulatory complaints, safety violations, accusations that damaged the company's reputation considerably. Barrett Mining was most forthcoming about your history when contacted via telegram. The revelation that Blackwood had communicated directly with Benjamin's former employers sent a chill through Catherine. The rancher's reach extended far beyond what she had imagined, and his tactics were more sophisticated than simple fence-cutting and cattle theft. If you've gone to such lengths to investigate Mr. Hayes, Catherine said, then you clearly have more than neighborly concern motivating your visit. State your purpose plainly, Mr. Blackwood. The rancher studied her with newfound respect. Direct, like your father. Very well. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I'm aware of what you've discovered on the North Ridge. Coal deposits, anthracite specifically, of potentially significant value. I'm here to make you a fair offer before matters become unnecessarily complicated. Complicated how? Catherine challenged. Mining development requires substantial capital, Miss Mitchell, capital you don't possess. It also requires political connections to navigate territorial regulations, connections that, forgive me, neither you nor Mr. Hayes currently enjoy. Blackwood spread his hands in a gesture of false reasonableness. Additionally, your existing financial obligations to the bank create certain pressures on your decision-making timeline. Benjamin moved to stand beside Catherine, a subtle demonstration of solidarity. And you believe these factors give you leverage to acquire valuable resources at below-market rates. I believe in mutually beneficial arrangements, Mr. Hayes, Blackwood corrected smoothly. Miss Mitchell receives immediate financial relief. I assume the risks and costs of development. Everyone profits accordingly. What exactly are you proposing? Catherine asked, determined to understand the full scope of his scheme. $20,000 for the mineral rights to the North Ridge, Blackwood stated. You retain ownership of the surface land and ranch operations. The sum would clear your bank obligations with considerable surplus for improvements to your cattle operation. The amount was substantial, more than Catherine had expected, yet she instantly recognized it represented a fraction of the coal's potential value. Benjamin's reaction confirmed her assessment. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she noticed his hand tighten almost imperceptibly on the back of the chair he stood behind. You're proposing separated mineral rights, Catherine observed. The same arrangement Deputy Marshal was investigating yesterday during our boundary survey. A flicker of annoyance crossed Blackwood's features before his practiced smile returned. The arrangement is standard practice in mining regions. Surface rights remain undisturbed, while extraction occurs through minimal access points. Except those minimal access points would require roads, equipment, workers, support structures, Benjamin countered, all cutting across Mitchell grazing land, disrupting cattle operations, potentially contaminating water sources. Details. To be addressed in the contract, Blackwood dismissed. My attorneys can draft appropriate terms. Catherine exchanged a glance with Benjamin, drawing strength from his steady presence. And if we decline your generous offer? The pleasant mask slipped slightly as Blackwood stood. Miss Mitchell, I admire your spirit, but you're facing realities. Beyond your experience, mining development involves complex legal frameworks that often favor those with established interests. Your bank loan matures in, what, 2 weeks? 3? Spencer mentioned you were seeking an extension. My financial arrangements with the bank are private, Catherine said sharply. Very little in this valley remains private for long. Blackwood replied, Consider my offer carefully. It expires in 3 days. He retrieved his hat, moving toward the door before pausing. Oh, and Mr. Hayes, Barrett Mining mentioned they'd be quite interested to learn of your current whereabouts. Something about unresolved matters following your departure. The veiled threat hung in the air as Blackwood departed, mounting his horse with practiced ease and leading his men away from the ranch at an unhurried pace that emphasized his confidence. When the riders had disappeared from view, Catherine closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. He knows everything. Not everything, Benjamin corrected, his expression grim. He knows there's coal, but not the extent or quality. He knows I worked for Barrett, but not all the details of why I left. He guided Catherine to a chair. His offer confirms the deposit's value. $20,000 is significant, but a fraction of what anthracite of this quality could yield over time. You think we should refuse? Benjamin hesitated, weighing his response carefully. That decision must be yours, Miss Mitchell. It's your land, your legacy. I can only advise that accepting Blackwood's terms would essentially surrender control of the most valuable resource on your property, while potentially compromising the viability of your ranch operations. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, processing the implications. And his threat against you? What unresolved matters exist with Barrett Mining? A shadow crossed Benjamin's face. My departure from Barrett was complicated, beyond the safety. Violations I reported to regulators. I gathered evidence of financial improprieties involving several company directors. Documentation that never reached the proper authorities. Why not? Because a week before I was to testify, a fire destroyed my office and the original records. I was subsequently accused of destroying company property to cover embezzlement. Benjamin's tone remained measured despite the clear injustice he described. The charges were eventually dropped for lack of evidence, but Barrett's directors made it clear that any future attempts to raise these issues would result in more permanent consequences. The revelation added layers to Catherine's understanding of her unlikely partner, not just a principled geologist who had sacrificed his position, but a man who had faced genuine danger for his convictions and been forced to flee east. Blackwood's casual mention of informing Barrett Mining of Benjamin's whereabouts wasn't merely inconvenient, it potentially endangered his life. Blackwood's offer expires in 3 days, Catherine mused, turning their attention back to the immediate threat. Why such a short timeline? He's likely concerned we'll reach outside investors before he can secure the rights, Benjamin suggested. Or perhaps he's aware of the governor's visit to Helena and fears we might seek intervention. Catherine rose, a new determination replacing her exhaustion. Then we need to act before he can. The governor arrives in Helena the day after tomorrow. If we leave at first light, it's a 4-day ride under ideal conditions, Benjamin reminded her. 3 if we push hard and take the cutoff through Blackwater Pass, Catherine countered. My father used that route when conditions allowed. Benjamin considered this. We'd need to bring the core samples and my preliminary assessment, and someone would need to remain here to protect the ranch. Martha can contact Sheriff Donnelly if Blackwood's men make any moves, Catherine said. He may be Blackwood's cousin by marriage, but he takes his duties seriously when presented with clear violations. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for their journey, Catherine organizing provisions and planning their route, Benjamin completing his geological assessment with careful documentation of their samples. By evening, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them both after the previous night's drilling expedition, followed by Blackwood's confrontation. "You should rest," Benjamin advised as Catherine pored over maps at the kitchen table. "Tomorrow will demand our full strength." "I could say the same to you," she replied, noting the fatigue evident in his posture despite his efforts to conceal it. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted subtly in the atmosphere between them. The mail-order husband arrangement that had brought them together had been effectively abandoned from their first meeting, replaced by a business partnership born of mutual necessity. Yet in the past few days, that practical alliance had evolved into something more complex, a genuine respect founded on shared challenges and complementary strengths. "I want to thank you," Catherine said suddenly. "When you stepped off that train, I saw only what you weren't, not a farmer or rancher, not physically imposing, not what I expected." "A reasonable assessment at the time," Benjamin acknowledged. With a faint smile, "Perhaps, but I failed to see what you were. Educated, principled, resourceful." She closed the map she'd been studying. "My father would have recognized your value immediately. It took me longer, and for that I apologize." Benjamin appeared momentarily taken aback by her candor. "No apology necessary, Miss Mitchell. I was hardly the husband you advertised for." "No," Catherine agreed. "You've proven far more valuable as a partner." The word hung between them, its meanings and possibilities expanding beyond their initial arrangement. Before either could address the charged moment, Martha entered with fresh coffee, her practical presence dispelling the tension. "If you're determined to reach Helena by the governor's arrival," she said, setting down the pot, "you'll need more than maps and samples. You'll need a compelling reason for him to intervene against someone as powerful as Blackwood." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "The governor has positioned himself as a champion of independent operators against monopolistic interests. Our situation aligns perfectly with his political narrative. Politicians respond to more than just principles," Benjamin observed. "They require practical incentives as well." "Tax revenue," Catherine suggested. "A properly developed coal operation would generate substantial territorial taxes, funds that would support the governor's infrastructure initiatives. And jobs," Benjamin added, warming to the strategy. "Mining. Development creates employment beyond the immediate operation. Transportation, services, supporting industries. All politically valuable to a territorial governor with ambitions for statehood." They continued refining their approach until well past midnight, crafting arguments that would appeal to both the governor's principles and his practical political concerns. When they finally retired, Catherine found herself lying awake despite her exhaustion, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. The mail-order husband she had nearly rejected had indeed brought unexpected change to Mitchell Ranch, not through the physical labor she had anticipated, but through knowledge that transformed worthless rock into valuable opportunity. Yet that transformation had also brought powerful enemies and complicated choices. As dawn approached, Catherine made her final decision. They would not accept Blackwood's offer regardless of the risks. The Northridge coal deposits represented not just financial salvation, but the fulfillment of her father's vision for the ranch's future. With Benjamin Hayes's expertise alongside her own determination, They would fight for that future, beginning with their race to reach the territorial governor before Blackwood could outmaneuver them. The game had evolved from simple survival to a contest for control of resources that could reshape the entire valley. Catherine Mitchell and her unlikely partner were now playing for stakes neither had anticipated when he stepped off that train just days earlier, stakes that extended far beyond the fate of a single struggling ranch. First light found Catherine and Benjamin already saddling their horses, the eastern sky barely tinged with pink as they secured provisions and critical documents for their journey. Martha stood on the porch, her weathered face creased with concern. "Jimmy Miller rode past twice yesterday evening," she reported. "Circled back toward Blackwood's ranch after dark. You can bet they'll be watching the main road to Helena." Catherine nodded, tightening a strap on her saddle. "That's why we're taking Blackwater Pass. It adds risk, but cuts a day off the journey and avoids the usual routes." "That pass can be treacherous this time of year," Martha warned. "Spring thaws make for unstable ground." "We'll proceed with caution," Benjamin assured her, carefully stowing the precious coal samples and his geological assessment in padded saddlebags. The documents were their strongest evidence, detailed analysis of the anthracite's quality, estimates of the deposit's extent, and projections of its commercial value. Martha handed Catherine a sealed envelope. "From your father's lockbox. He always said to use it only in greatest need." She lowered her voice. "It's a letter to Governor Davis. They served together in the war before your father settled here." Catherine accepted the envelope with surprise. "He never mentioned knowing the governor personally. Your father kept many connections private, said it was better to stand on your own merits until you couldn't." Martha straightened Catherine's collar with maternal concern. "If Blackwood's men come while you're gone, show them nothing," Catherine instructed. "If they press, ride for the sheriff. Donnelly may be Blackwood's relation, but he won't tolerate outright lawlessness, especially if you mention we've gone to speak with the governor." After final instructions and goodbye embraces, they mounted and rode out as dawn fully broke over the mountains. Rather than taking the main trail toward town, they cut directly eastward, across Mitchell property, following a barely visible path that wound toward the distant peaks. "This route hasn't seen much use in recent years," Catherine explained as they navigated through increasingly dense pine forest. "My father maintained it for emergency access to the high country, but few others know of it." "Blackwood's men won't expect us to travel this direction," Benjamin observed, studying the terrain with a geologist's precision. "It leads away from Helena initially." "We'll swing north after crossing Campbell Creek," Catherine confirmed. The pass itself cuts through the mountains 15 miles ahead, bypassing the main roads entirely. They rode steadily through the morning, making good time across familiar Mitchell terrain. By midday, they had reached Campbell Creek, swollen. With spring runoff, its waters rushing noisily between rocky banks. "We cross here," Catherine indicated, guiding her horse to a narrower section where fallen logs created a natural bridge. "The horses will need to swim. We'll lead them from the makeshift bridge." Benjamin dismounted, assessing the crossing with careful consideration. "The current is strong, but manageable. We should secure the saddlebags in case the horses struggle." They worked efficiently to waterproof their critical documents and samples, wrapping them in oilskin before securing them higher on the saddles. Benjamin insisted on testing the log bridge first, crossing carefully while Catherine held his horse's reins. "It's solid enough," he called from the opposite bank. "Send my horse across and I'll guide him through the deeper section." Catherine released the gelding, who plunged into the rushing water with initial reluctance before swimming powerfully toward Benjamin's encouraging voice. Once the first horse was safely across, Catherine followed on the log bridge, then guided her own mount through the creek. As her horse climbed the far bank, a rifle shot cracked through the air, splintering bark from a tree inches from Catherine's head. She immediately dropped to the ground, pulling her horse down behind the embankment for cover. Benjamin was already crouched behind a fallen log, his revolver drawn, a weapon Catherine hadn't realized he carried. "Blackwood's men," she whispered as another shot whistled overhead. "Likely," Benjamin confirmed, calculating angles with quick precision. "From the ridge to the south. They must have anticipated this route despite its disuse." Catherine extracted her own rifle from its saddle holster. "Two shooters based on the report timing. They're trying to pin us down, probably until reinforcements arrive." "We can't afford delay," Benjamin stated grimly. "Every hour matters if we're to reach Helena." Before the governor departs, Catherine studied their surroundings, formulating a plan. There's a ravine about 50 yards upriver that leads away from their position. If one of us provides covering fire, the other could reach it with the horses. Benjamin nodded. "I'll cover. You're more familiar with the terrain ahead. You should lead the way to the ravine." "You're a better shot than you look, Harvard man," Catherine challenged, managing a tight smile despite their dire situation. "I spent summers hunting in Maine with my uncles before attending university," he replied, checking his revolver's chambers. "I'll manage." On Benjamin's signal, Catherine gathered both horses' reins and prepared to run. He rose suddenly, firing 3 rapid shots toward the ridge, where their attackers were positioned. The unexpected counterattack momentarily silenced the rifleman, giving Catherine her opening. She sprinted toward the ravine, struggling to control both startled horses while staying low. Benjamin's covering fire continued in measured intervals, keeping the bushwhackers' heads down until Catherine reached the shelter of the deeply cut ravine. Once secure, she tied the horses and returned to the ravine's edge with her rifle, providing her own covering fire to allow Benjamin's retreat. He darted between trees with surprising agility for a man who had initially appeared so unsuited to frontier challenges. A bullet clipped his sleeve as he dove into the ravine beside Catherine, but he appeared uninjured as they caught their breath. "In the relative safety of the rocky depression, they'll flank us if we stay," Catherine warned, already moving toward the horses. "This ravine continues north. We can follow it for half a mile before we need to ascend toward the pass." They mounted quickly, bending low over their horses' necks as they navigated the narrow ravine. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them. As they pushed deeper into unfamiliar territory, the terrain growing increasingly rugged. "Blackwood anticipated our move," Benjamin observed as they finally slowed their pace to rest the winded horses. "He must have stationed men at multiple potential routes." "He wants those coal rights badly," Catherine agreed, checking her mount for injuries. "Enough to risk charges of attempted murder." "Frontier justice is often negotiable for men with Blackwood's influence," Benjamin noted grimly. "If we had been killed, it would likely have been dismissed as an unfortunate hunting accident." They continued northward as afternoon shadows lengthened, the temperature dropping noticeably as they gained elevation. The path to Blackwater Pass grew steeper and more treacherous, requiring them to dismount and lead the horses across sections where loose shale created treacherous footing. "The pass was named for the dark waters of the lake at its summit," Catherine explained as they navigated a particularly difficult stretch. "Local tribes considered it a sacred place. My father respected their beliefs and rarely brought outsiders this way." Benjamin studied the increasingly dramatic geology with professional interest, despite their urgent pace. "These formations suggest significant upheaval, relatively recent in geological terms. The entire mountain range likely rose during the same period that compressed carbon deposits into anthracite coal in the valleys below." As dusk approached, they reached a small plateau that offered limited shelter, a stand of wind-twisted pines beside a rocky overhang. With the temperature Falling rapidly and their horses exhausted, they made the difficult decision to make camp. "We've put enough distance between us and Blackwood's men for now," Catherine assessed as they unsaddled the horses. "Continuing in darkness would risk injury we can't afford." Benjamin gathered firewood while Catherine established a minimal camp. Both working with the efficiency of people who understood their survival depended on proper preparation. Once a small, well-shielded fire was burning, they allowed themselves to relax marginally. "You handled yourself well during the ambush," Catherine remarked, as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits. "Not what I expected from a Harvard-educated geologist," Benjamin smiled faintly. "My grandfather believed education should be comprehensive, academic and practical alike. He insisted I learn marksmanship, tracking and wilderness survival alongside mathematics and classical literature. A wise man." "He would have appreciated your father's philosophy," Benjamin observed. "Both understood that true capability extends beyond specialized knowledge." Catherine nodded, finding unexpected comfort in these parallels between their backgrounds. Despite their seemingly different upbringings, hers on a frontier ranch, his in Eastern privilege, certain core values aligned in ways she hadn't anticipated when he first stepped off the train. "If we reach the governor in time," she said, changing the subject to their immediate concerns, "what exactly do we ask of him? Blackwood's political connections are substantial." Benjamin considered this carefully. "We request two specific interventions. First, official recognition of your mineral rights claim, processed through his office rather than local channels Blackwood might influence. Second, protection from further intimidation while we secure legitimate investors. And you believe Governor Davis will intervene based solely on our evidence and appeal to his principles?" "Your father's letter may prove significant," Benjamin reminded her. "Personal connections often transcend political calculations." Catherine removed the sealed envelope from her inside pocket, studying her father's handwriting on the front with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. After a moment's hesitation, she broke the seal, unfolding the single page within. "Davis," she read aloud, "the bearer of this letter is my daughter Catherine. If she comes to you, the situation is dire indeed, as she would exhaust all other options before seeking assistance. Whatever she requests deserves your fullest consideration, not for my sake, but because her judgment and integrity match her remarkable determination. She has never asked for special treatment and does not do so lightly now. Remember our discussion at Antietam about debts that transcend ordinary obligations. Yours, Robert Mitchell." Catherine lowered the letter, momentarily overcome by her father's faith in her. "He never told me about Antietam or any debts between him and the governor." "Some experiences forge connections too profound for casual discussion," Benjamin suggested quietly. "Your father clearly believed this connection would prove valuable. When truly needed, they fell silent as darkness enveloped the mountains completely, the small fire casting flickering shadows against the rock face behind them. Despite her exhaustion, Catherine found sleep elusive, her mind racing with calculations of distance, time, and probability. "We should reach the summit by midday tomorrow," she said finally, breaking the contemplative silence. "From there, it's a steep descent to Miners Junction, where we can possibly obtain fresh horses." Benjamin nodded, adding another small branch to their fire. "And if Blackwood has men watching that settlement as well?" "Then we'll adapt," Catherine stated with simple determination. "One way or another, we will reach Helena before the governor departs." The confidence in her voice belied the challenges ahead: treacherous mountain terrain, potential additional ambushes, and the physical limitations of both riders and horses. Yet Benjamin's answering nod contained equal resolve, their shared purpose creating a bond that transcended their initial mail-order arrangement. As Catherine finally drifted toward sleep, wrapped in her father's old buffalo robe against the mountain. Chill. Her last conscious thought was how dramatically her assessment of Benjamin Hayes had changed. The seemingly poor, unsuitable husband she had nearly rejected now represented her strongest ally in a fight that would determine not just her financial survival, but potentially her physical safety as well. His secret, the geological knowledge that had identified valuable resources beneath seemingly worthless rock, had indeed changed everything, transforming their relationship from reluctant necessity to genuine partnership founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. They would reach the governor together or not at all, each bringing complementary strengths to a challenge neither could overcome alone. As the mountain winds whispered through pine boughs overhead, Catherine Mitchell and Benjamin Hayes rested briefly, gathering strength for the difficult path still ahead. A path that would test not just their physical endurance, but the depth of their newfound alliance. Morning would bring renewed dangers, but also another day's opportunity to outpace Blackwood's schemes and secure a future neither had imagined possible when Benjamin first stepped off that train in Riverbrook just days before. The territorial governor's office in Helena occupied the top floor of a stately brick building that stood in stark contrast to the rough-hewn structures dominating most Montana settlements. Catherine and Benjamin arrived travel-worn and exhausted, having pushed themselves and their horses to the limits of endurance during the final day of their journey. Their path to Helena had been fraught with additional challenges. A washed-out trail that forced a precarious detour, another brief encounter with Blackwood's men near Miners Junction that they narrowly evaded, and the relentless pressure of time as Governor Davis's scheduled departure approached. The governor's secretary, a fastidious man with wire-rimmed spectacles, regarded them with barely concealed disdain as they requested an audience. "Governor Davis's schedule is fully committed before his departure this evening," he informed them with practiced dismissiveness. "Perhaps you could leave your information for his review upon his return next month." Catherine produced her father's letter. "Please inform the governor that Catherine Mitchell, daughter of Robert Mitchell, requests 5 minutes of his time on a matter of urgent territorial interest." The secretary's expression remained unchanged as he accepted the envelope, disappearing through heavy oak doors. When he returned moments later, his demeanor had transformed entirely. "The governor will see you immediately," he announced, gesturing for them to follow. Governor William Davis proved nothing like Catherine had imagined. Rather than the imposing political figure she expected, she found a man of average height with kind eyes and a beard streaked with gray. He rose from behind an imposing desk as they entered, moving forward with his hand extended. "Robert Mitchell's daughter," he said warmly, clasping Catherine's hand between both of his. "The resemblance is remarkable. You have his determination in your eyes." "Thank you for seeing us, Governor," Catherine replied, acutely aware of their disheveled appearance after days on the trail. "Your father saved my life at Antietam," Davis stated simply. "When he wrote that I owed him a debt beyond ordinary obligations, he understated the matter considerably." His gaze shifted to Benjamin. "And you are?" "Benjamin Hayes, Governor, Miss Mitchell's business partner." Davis gestured for them to sit. "I gather from your appearance and urgency that this isn't a social call. How can I help Robert Mitchell's daughter?" Catherine outlined their situation concisely. The valuable anthracite deposit discovered on Mitchell land, Blackwood's attempts to claim it through coercion and legal manipulation, and the attempted ambush during their journey to Helena. Benjamin provided the scientific evidence, presenting his geological assessment and core samples. The coal seam appears to run continuously through the North Ridge Formation, suggesting a deposit of potentially regional significance. Properly developed, It could supply industrial operations throughout the territory and beyond. Governor Davis listened intently, examining the samples with genuine interest. Anthracite of this quality would indeed transform industrial development in the territory. Currently, most of our coal is imported at considerable expense. He set down the samples, his expression turning serious. Carson Blackwood is a significant political contributor and influences several territorial legislators. His opposition would create complications. "We're not asking you to oppose him directly," Catherine clarified, "only to ensure that established legal processes aren't corrupted by his influence. Our mineral rights claim should be judged on its merits, not on political connections. And you require immediate action," Davis concluded, noting the urgency in their presentation. "Blackwood has given Miss Mitchell 3 days to accept his offer before he pursues alternative approaches," Benjamin confirmed. "Given his previous tactics, we have reason to believe those alternatives may involve legal manipulations or worse." The governor stood, moving to gaze out his window at the growing territorial capital below. For a moment, Catherine feared they had failed to convince him of the situation's urgency or legitimacy. "Robert once told me," Davis said finally, "that the true measure of governance is how we treat those without power or influence when they seek nothing more than fair treatment under the law." He turned back to face them. "I find myself reflecting on that wisdom today." He returned to his desk, pulling official letterhead forward. "I'll issue an executive directive to the Territorial Land Office, authorizing expedited processing of your mineral rights claim under special gubernatorial review. This removes local officials from the approval chain, placing it directly under my office's supervision." Catherine felt a surge of relief as the governor continued writing. "Additionally, I'll dispatch territorial marshals to investigate reports of armed intimidation in Riverbrook County. The safety of territorial citizens is non-negotiable, regardless of who threatens it." Benjamin leaned forward. "Governor, there's one additional matter. Barrett Mining Corporation has been making inquiries about my whereabouts, apparently at Blackwood's instigation." Davis's expression darkened. "Barrett's business practices have drawn federal scrutiny recently. Their attempts to silence former employees through intimidation are particularly troubling." He added another paragraph to his directive. "I'm appointing you as a special territorial consultant on mineral resource development, Mr. Hayes. This official position includes certain protections against unwarranted legal harassment." As the governor completed the documents, applying his official seal, Catherine realized how dramatically their prospects had changed in mere minutes. The power dynamics that had seemed so overwhelmingly against them had shifted through this unexpected alliance. "This won't end Blackwood's ambitions," Davis warned as he handed them the signed directives. "Men like him don't surrender valuable opportunities easily. But it levels the field and provides legal protection while you secure legitimate development partners." "That's all we sought," Catherine assured him. "A fair chance to develop the resources on our own terms." "Your father would expect nothing less," the governor replied with a knowing smile. "He was the most stubborn man I ever met, except perhaps for my wife." As they prepared to depart, Davis added, "I'll be checking personally on the progress of your venture, Miss Mitchell. The territory has significant interest in seeing these resources developed responsibly by independent operators rather than Eastern conglomerates. My office stands ready to assist as needed." Their return journey to Riverbrook proved remarkably different from their desperate race to Helena. With the governor's directives secured in Catherine's saddlebags, they traveled the main roads openly, no longer fearing Blackwood's men, who would now risk territorial charges for any interference. They arrived at the Mitchell Ranch to find Martha anxiously awaiting their return. "Blackwood himself came yesterday," she reported as they dismounted. "Demanded to know your whereabouts. When I wouldn't tell him, he threatened to return with the sheriff to search the property." Did he follow through? Catherine asked, unsaddling her exhausted horse. No, Martha replied with a hint of satisfaction. A telegram arrived for him while he was blustering. Whatever it said changed his tune immediately, left without another word. Benjamin and Catherine exchanged knowing glances. The governor works quickly, he observed. In the days that followed, the landscape of possibilities transformed dramatically. The Territorial Land Office processed their mineral rights claim with unprecedented speed, officially documenting Mitchell, ownership of both surface and subsurface resources. Simultaneously, several of Benjamin's former colleagues responded to his inquiries, expressing serious interest in the anthracite discovery. A week after their return, as Catherine and Benjamin reviewed potential partnership proposals at her father's desk, Sheriff Donnelly arrived with unexpected news. "Thought you should know," he announced without preamble. "Carson Blackwood is selling his ranch, listing the entire property with agents in Helena and Denver." Catherine's shock must have shown on her face, for the sheriff added, "Apparently, he received notification of a federal investigation into certain business practices, something about attempted intimidation of government witnesses. Word is he's returning east to address family matters indefinitely." After Donnelly departed, Benjamin turned to Catherine with understated satisfaction. "Governor Davis appears to have done more than simply level the playing field." "I never expected Blackwood to retreat entirely," Catherine admitted, struggling to process this dramatic reversal. "Men like Blackwood calculate risk precisely," Benjamin observed. "When federal investigations enter the equation, the mathematics change substantially." The weeks that followed brought rapid developments. After careful consideration of multiple offers, Catherine and Benjamin formed a partnership with Westlake Mining, a smaller but reputable operation whose owner, James Westlake, shared Benjamin's commitment to modern safety practices and environmental considerations. The development agreement they crafted together preserved Catherine's ownership of the ranch, while ensuring mining operations remained contained to the north ridge, with strict protections for water sources and cattle grazing areas. Benjamin's expertise guided the technical specifications, while Catherine's practical knowledge of the land informed operational boundaries. Standing together on the porch one evening as surveyors marked the initial development sites in the distance, Catherine reflected on how completely her circumstances had transformed in less than 2 months. "When you stepped off that train," she said to Benjamin, who stood beside her watching the surveyor's progress, "I saw only what was missing, not what was present." "An understandable assessment," he replied with the hint of a smile that had become increasingly common as their partnership flourished. "I hardly presented the image of a capable ranch hand." "No," Catherine agreed. "You presented something far more valuable, though I lacked the wisdom to recognize it immediately." Their conversation was interrupted by Martha, who emerged from the house with a telegram. "Just arrived from Helena," she announced, handing the paper to Catherine. Catherine read it quickly, her expression brightening. "Governor Davis has approved the territorial funding for the rail spur to connect our mining operation with the main line. Construction begins next month. That ensures viable transportation for the coal," Benjamin noted, his mind already calculating the improved economics this development represented. "With rail access, production can scale significantly faster than we projected." As Martha returned inside, Catherine found herself studying Benjamin's profile in the fading light. The mail-order husband she had almost immediately rejected as too poor had revealed himself to be rich in qualities far more valuable than the financial security she had initially sought: intelligence, integrity, courage, and vision. "The bank extended my loan yesterday," she remarked. "Spencer was practically obsequious. Amazing how discovering valuable resources changes one's creditworthiness." "People often see only surface value," Benjamin observed, "missing the true worth." Beneath, the parallel to their own relationship remained unspoken but hung in the air between them, acknowledged in the glance they shared. Our partnership agreement expires once the mining operation is fully established, Catherine noted carefully. You'll be free to pursue other opportunities with your reputation restored. True, Benjamin acknowledged, though I find myself increasingly attached to Mitchell land and its possibilities. He hesitated before adding, and to its determined owner. Catherine felt an unexpected warmth at his words. The practical arrangement that had brought them together had evolved into something neither had anticipated. A genuine bond, forged through shared challenges and complementary strengths. The ranch will need ongoing geological consultation, she suggested, maintaining the pretense of business discussion while her meaning ran deeper. A more permanent arrangement might be worth considering. Benjamin turned to face her fully. Ah, you proposing an extended partnership, Miss Mitchell? I'm considering possibilities I hadn't imagined when I sent for a mail-order husband, Catherine replied with newfound confidence. Perhaps we both received something different than expected, but ultimately more valuable. As the setting sun painted Montana's endless sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine Mitchell and Benjamin Hayes stood together on the porch of the ranch that had nearly been lost, now secured not just for the present, but for generations to come. The mail-order husband rejected for being too poor had indeed changed everything through his secret knowledge. But the greater transformation had come through the partnership that emerged from their unlikely beginning. A partnership founded not on Catherine's initial expectations of physical strength and farming experience, but on the richer qualities of character, intelligence, and shared purpose. As twilight settled over Mitchell land, the future stretched before them, different from what either had imagined when their paths first crossed, but filled with possibilities that neither could have achieved alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.